Hi, today I want to give you my 2 cents on marriage, divorce, hiring an attorney, or doing it representing yourself as pro se. So, I'm not a lawyer, but I did represent myself in my divorce. But before I talk about that, getting married seems like the thing to do when you're young. It seems like the society expects you to do that, especially if you desire to have kids and a family. And maybe that's true. But what I can tell you from my experience is that it's a lot more expensive and emotionally, both emotionally and financially, to get divorced. So in other words, it's a lot harder to get divorced than it is to get married. It's easier to get married than it is to get divorced. The emotional, physical, and financial costs of getting divorced are much greater than getting married. So if I was to give myself some advice with the time machine, I would tell myself not to get married unless we had planned the divorce first. So sometimes you hear of it like a prenuptial, which is kind of deals with the financial things mostly, but you could also put in there language that would relate to raising the children and custody and all that kind of thing. So obviously it's more complicated if you have children when you get divorced than if you don't have children. But even if you don't have children and you don't have pets, it still can be very stressful and overwhelming and time consuming. It takes a lot longer to get divorced if you're not in agreement on division of the property. So let's say you don't have kids and you're just about money and physical things. If you're not in agreement, then it can take a long time to get to a resolution, and you have to suffer, various things during that time. So if you have the financial things figured out before you get married, if you have the child custody and how you're going to raise the child, where is the child going to go to school, what religion, if any, is the child going to be exposed to, as many details as you could possibly think of, and you have that agreement before you get married, it might save you some time, money, and stress if you get divorced. So divorce is common, and being in an unhappy marriage is common. I read, saw, and I don't know how accurate these numbers are, but you probably heard them. 50% of all marriages end in divorce. 65% of marriages are unhappy. People are married, but they're unhappy. So if you combine the 50% of divorce with another, 15% of people that are married but unhappy together, that's about 65% of people in relationships aren't happy. And I don't know. From my experience, that sounds about right, but obviously there are people that their marriages end in death, which is what you wish for, right? To death do we part. So if you get that, you have that, do everything you can to maintain that happiness and that bliss, and that's wonderful. But if you are served with divorce, right? If maybe you see it coming, maybe you agree to it, but maybe you just get a piece of paper delivered to you that your spouse wants a divorce. And then the next thing is, do you hire an attorney or do you represent yourself? If you represent yourself, that's called pro se. And now, if you're in agreement, both parties can, if you have that agreement ahead of time, neither one of you need an attorney, and you just submit your agreement, and it's probably 90 days or less, and it's over. But if one person hires an attorney, like in my case, my ex-wife hired an attorney, and then my decision was, do I hire an attorney or do I not? Now, most courts in most states in the United States are, if say your spouse hires an attorney and you don't hire an attorney, you're still going to pay half of their attorney fees. And so if you hire an attorney, right, then the fees are double. So the only people that win in a divorce are the attorneys, because both the attorneys get paid and they don't really care about their client as much as they care about getting paid. So I decided not to hire an attorney and represent myself. Now, I knew I had plenty of time to research what I needed to know, how to learn to do it myself. And that's not for everybody. If you're working, full time or beyond, you could be, at one point in my life, I was working 6 days a week, 60 hours a week plus. So that probably wouldn't have been a good time to do it myself. But in my situation recently, I had a very low workload, and so I had plenty of time to figure things out. And nowadays, with the internet and AI helping you, you really can find pretty much everything you need, and you can visit the courthouse in person, and they have people that will help you and forms and everything. So I decided to represent myself, and it took a long time, 16 months and from the beginning, my ex wanted more than a 50-50 split of the money, the property, the assets. And all I wanted was a 50-50 split. And so I knew that the law in that particular state that I was in was on my side in that regard. She also wanted alimony on top of more than 50% of the assets. And I did my research, and I felt like, that wasn't appropriate in our situation either. So I held my ground on a 50-50 split of the assets, no alimony, and that I would pay half of her legal fees. And it took a long time. There was mediation. The mediation failed because I stuck to my request. Then there was a pre-trial conference, and there was a negotiation or an attempt at negotiation from her attorney to get me to come away from what I wanted, and I said no. Then we went to trial, and before the trial started, the judge encouraged us to negotiate, and again I held firm to what I believed was the law and what I wanted, and I was nervous. I won't lie. I was sweating a little bit in front of the judge, and it was very uncomfortable, but I was able to present my side of the situation, and then just wait to hear what the judge had to say. And in that moment, I was, that 1%, 1% doubt in my mind. I was like, it's not going to go my way. But in the end, the judge ruled 50-50 split of the assets, the money, the things, no alimony, and I had already agreed to paying 50% of her legal fees. So her legal fees ended up to be around $12,000. So I had to give her $6,000. Now, if I had hired a lawyer, then I'm not sure how much that would have cost me, right? Would that have cost me the whole, at least $12,000, maybe more, right? Because $12,000, half of hers, and then the whole 12 for me. So it would have cost me $18,000. So that's really a lot of money, right? And so just something to think about. Again, my 2 cents on marriage and divorce. And like I said, I feel like it's a lot easier emotionally, financially, physically to get married than it is to get divorced. So I'd really encourage you to think long and hard and have maybe the divorce planned before the marriage if you decide to go that route, or maybe not get married at all, but you can still have a relationship, you can still have children. Another quick thing, especially, make sure you have your own car, right? So that whatever your situation is, you have a car that's in your name that you paid for before you get married, and maintain that car. And if you replace it with a new one, that it's your car in your name, and that way you don't necessarily feel trapped. I mean, ideally, in a perfect world, if you got good money, you want to have 2 separate houses, a house that's in your name, house that's in your spouse's name, so that if it doesn't work out, you can go to your separate houses, but that's not realistic for most people. But the car, make sure you have your own car, maintain your own car, and make sure you have a bank account before you get married that is separate from your spouse, that you have some money in there and you keep that money in there and you don't use that money for the marriage. It's a safety net. It's, just in case money, just for you. And the last thing I'll tell you, in some states, your retirement accounts are subject to division in a divorce. In some states, your retirement is protected in a divorce. So make sure you look at the laws, at the very least, of the state that you're getting married in and plan to live in, and before you move, so that if there's any issues, if you think a divorce is possibly in the horizon, or you just want to be safe, like if you're going to move from one state where your retirement is protected in a divorce situation in terms of being divided, but then you're going to move to a state where your retirement accounts could be divided in a divorce, think about that in your decision whether to retire to that state, and whether to get married in that state, depending on your age, how much you've put into retirement, because that can be a significant amount of money and affect your post-retirement lifestyle. I mean, post-divorce lifestyle. So, if you like this video, I've got some other sort of life lessons that I'm going to be sharing with you. So please like the video, subscribe, and I'll send you some, and I'll make some more advice videos coming up, and hopefully they'll save you some time and money. Thanks for watching, and have a great day.